Hello, this is Nelson Sear, Senior Discovery TV, and we're here on the SDTV Reno 150 Celebration Project. And with me today is Robin Holabird, who is the former Deputy Director of the Nevada Film Commission and currently a film reviewer with KUNR 88.7 Reno, and that's on FM. So welcome, Robin. Glad to have you. And I haven't seen you since we took the movie tour with you with my wife.
Oh, right. So you got to walk a mile around Reno and see some famous sights.
We did. We enjoyed that.
So besides being a film commissioner and movie reviewer, I also wrote a book about movies in Nevada, and Reno included, of course. And the thing that really surprises people when they read this book, there's two things. They find that there's a lot of funny stuff in it, and there are some funny stories to tell. But they're really surprised at the number of movies that were made in Nevada and Reno as well. People think of Hollywood, New York, places like that, Nevada not being a big film center, and in fact it really is not a big film center with studios and that sort of thing, but a lot of projects come through here. How many? I haven't sat down and counted, but I know it's thousands, and that's what amazes people, thousands of projects. In terms of history for Reno, well, we go back to the silent films, and let's call it the Reno area because the very first feature, or not feature, but film in Nevada was Carson City, and that was the Corbett-Fitzsimmons fight. It was an amazing job of filming for its time because it used 3 cameras going at once, 70 millimeter. 70 millimeter is what, if you went to see Lawrence of Arabia on the big screen in its day, that was 70 millimeter. They don't do that very often anymore. I think Quentin Tarantino did it with Hateful Eight, but it's pretty rare. The 3 cameras going at once meant there were different angles, so it could be cut and edited together like a movie. Although essentially what it is a documentary capturing this fight, Corbett-Fitzsimmons, which turned out to be one of the many fights of the century. It had a surprise ending. People couldn't believe what happened. It traveled the country. Once it was edited, it traveled the country, and people from all over the U.S. came to watch this fight on big screens. So it was one of the nation's first blockbusters, and it came out of Nevada, near Reno. So historically, we have Carson City and the Reno area on film around 1898. That's over 100 years ago. And for the first part of Nevada and Reno's film history, you found that it was things like fights that brought movies to the area, that brought filming to the area. And that all goes into Nevada's really different history. Nevada is not a state that was on the mainstream. It was famous for fostering the forbidden, for doing things differently from the rest of the nation. So things that were illegal in other states were legal here, and that includes boxing. You couldn't hold boxing matches just anywhere. You couldn't have gambling just anywhere. You couldn't have divorces just anywhere. And you couldn't have legalized prostitution or brothels just anywhere. Now that came later in the history. But today we maintain that fostering the forbidden idea. Look at the slogan for Las Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And we do have, at this point, the only legal brothels in the whole country. Everybody else now has gambling, they have casinos, they have divorces and boxing, that sort of thing. But Nevada remains unique in the United States, and that makes it unique in film history for the kinds of projects that we were able to garner. As Nevada moved into the talkie era, Reno was the center point of the state. Las Vegas was still working its way up. So across the world, across the nation, people heard of Reno. And Reno, fostering the forbidden with its boxing matches, was most famous as the divorce center of the country. You went to Reno to get renovated. Reno, as Claire Booth Luce said in her play The Women, cradle of liberty. And Reno was a big part of that play, The Women. They didn't actually shoot in the area, although we think they may have done some of a divorce ranch up in the Truckee area. We're not positive about that. But other projects like Charlie Chan in Reno dealt specifically with the divorce trade. Most of the time, if Reno showed up in a title, and it often did, There was a divorce element to the screenplay, and that continued actually almost into the 70s, because one of Reno's biggest movies, if not the biggest movie ever filmed in Reno, was The Misfits, and that dealt with the divorce trade. The Misfits started filming in 1960. That was rather unique because it filmed sequentially. And what that means is they started at the beginning, they shot the beginning scene, then they shot the next scene. So if the actors weren't needed in that scene and they weren't needed in Reno, they went home to LA and the next scene shot. So in the movie, there's a character played by Thelma Ritter. She's in the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie. She came up for the beginning, she went home, she came back for the end of the movie. Now the main stars, Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, of course, they were here the whole time for that movie, and it made a big splash in Reno. Anybody who was here in Reno when The Misfits was filming has some kind of story to tell about it. Marilyn Monroe saw me and I was a beautiful baby, that's what she said, or things like that. You know, it just, it caught people's imagination. In today's terms, it would be like having Harrison Ford here, big deal. Clark Gable was a big deal. As a matter of fact, he did Gone with the Wind, which is kind of like doing Star Wars. What type of actress is Marilyn today in today's world? Hard to say. She's an iconic figure. Many times, you could say another actor in the movie, Montgomery Clift, and you're talking to a 20-year-old who's going, huh? Who's Montgomery Clift? But you say Marilyn Monroe, and everybody knows who Marilyn Monroe is. She is an iconic figure. It's hard to imagine anybody quite like her today who in 50 years will all be saying, oh yeah, I know who she is. But big name, sexy star, that's who Marilyn Monroe was in the day. And she played a divorcee, or a woman coming to Reno to get divorced. And it was all based on a level of truth, because there was this guy, Arthur Miller, well, maybe one of the greatest American playwrights. He did The Crucible and Death of a Salesman. And he decided he wanted to divorce his wife and marry somebody. So he came to Reno, actually Pyramid Lake area, stayed at a divorce ranch. And while he was staying, I think it was 6 weeks was the minimum then. I may be wrong on the exact amount of time. But you had to live here in Nevada for a little bit. You had to be a resident in order to get the divorce. So there he is up around Pyramid Lake. This is a man from New York State, New York City, thriving in a big populous world. And he's come to Nevada of the late 1950s at this time, and seeing something that he had never seen before, including a bunch of cowboys whose world was disappearing. They couldn't cowboy quite the way they used to, so they were rounding up wild horses. They were romancing with some of the women who came to the area to get divorced. All of this inspired Miller to write a short story, which he then developed into a screenplay called The Misfits. And again, that idea of misfits goes with fostering the forbidden, Nevada not being part of the mainstream. This was a world of misfits because people weren't supposed to get divorced then. They weren't supposed to get divorced easily, that's for sure. They weren't supposed to still look like cowboys, and they were supposed to live in places that were developed, not this wide open, wild place that Miller discovered when he stayed in Nevada for his own divorce, so that he could marry, guess who? Marilyn Monroe. And he writes The Misfit based on the type of personality or the aura that she had. The character is named Rosalind. It sounds a lot like Marilyn. And I think one of the lines that really defines the character is when Clark Gable's character says to Rosalind, oh, you know, you're not happy. And she's surprised because she says, well, men always think that I'm so happy. And he says to her, well, that's because you make them happy. They catch that essence of Marilyn in the movie The Misfits. When it came out, people were startled by it. It was off the beaten path. I think maybe they were expecting a lighter comedy because Clark Gable did comedies, Marilyn Monroe did comedies, and here you have this heavy drama with a very dramatic and still today painful rounding up of wild horses scene to watch at the end. So the movie, much to the surprise of everybody involved, and we're not only talking Miller, but the director John Huston, who had a couple of Oscars, I mean, great director, they thought they were doing a Gone with the Wind masterpiece. Did not really catch on at the box office at the time, didn't win all the awards they thought it was going to win, but eventually over the years, as people started watching it again and looking at it understanding what it was about. It's gained in reputation. It has been listed in the National Registry as one of the significant films made in the United States. It's still being watched more than 50 years after it was made, and it defines Reno of its era. It really does showcase a lot about Reno. What's surprising is you can still find some of those elements. No, we don't have the divorce trade anymore, although if you go to the courthouse and you'll see a placard in front talking about the divorce trade. If you go to where the Mapes used to be, and the Mapes is where the film crew had stayed, there are some photos and displays, and they talk about Reno as a divorce trade. So the history of it is still here. But what I find fun, and I've gone out on several road trips finding some of the Misfits locations, you go to Pyramid Lake, where part of the Misfits filmed, and midweek, it can be as empty as it was in the Misfits. The flat where the wild horses came down is called Misfits Flat. It was actually named after the movie. It's off of US 50A, and it's still a flat. You're not supposed to go drive your car out there because it's private property, but it doesn't look all that different. And then the wild horses, even today, are still controversial. The guys in the Misfits are rounding them up to turn them into dog food. That's still happening today, 50 years later. And people are still having issues with wild horses. They're around. I mean, I live in South Reno. I can go out my front door, and some days there's a little band of horses mowing my lawn for me. So there are parts of Reno, parts of the Misfit that still exist. And there's a plaque honoring it on the Harrah's building in downtown Reno. But a very significant film for Reno.
Rolling.
People who come to Reno might also notice a plaque for a movie called Sister Act on the Reno Arch. And yes, Sister Act did film in Reno. Most of it takes place in San Francisco. It was one of the most fun projects I worked on as a film commissioner. I didn't expect to get Sister Act. I got a phone call saying that the guys from Sister Act were coming up. They had to look at Reno because the studio said you had to look at least 3 places. They thought they were going to film in Las Vegas, although, ironically enough, the plot was written for Atlantic City as a casino town. And in the story, they need a showgirl who sees something in a casino town to be able to flee and hide in a convent in a big city. So the idea was Atlantic City, New York City. Well, that was falling apart. Oh, that was with Bette Midler, by the way. That didn't happen, so it was going to turn into Whoopi Goldberg in Las Vegas, seeing what she shouldn't and fleeing to Los Angeles. It would have been very economical to film in LA. But they had to go look at Reno as well because it's a casino town and you could connect Reno to San Francisco. Well, that's fine. I had fun just showing people some of the casinos that might work. They wanted a little tiny lounge. They wanted a counting room, a money counting room. And they were kind of surprised because at that time, Harold's Club's management said, sure, go look at our counting room. That's not done in casinos very often. But the flexibility in Reno really impressed them. And then I was having lunch with the crew and the director, Emilio Ardolino, who had done the movie Dirty Dancing. And he said to me, well, you know, if we go to Vegas, we're going to have big fancy stunts up on the stratosphere. There will be helicopters and all that. If we come to Reno, though, we'll have to be more character-driven. And I said, oh, you mean like Dirty Dancing? He gave me this smile, and I realized, wait a minute, I think we have this project. And it really did come to Reno. It was a lot of fun on that. They were getting some different things coordinated with it, and one of the things was Reno's supposed to look like a big casino town. Well, those of us who lived in Reno in the 1990s know that not only was it never a really giant casino town, but at that time there were a lot of casinos whose lights were dark. And so if you were looking from the air, you could see Harrah's was open and a few others, but there were these dark spots. And the production company wanted to get the lights turned on in these closed casinos. So a lot of work. This is what film commissioners do that's so glamorous. You get on the phone calling to see who's in charge of the electricity and the lights for closed casinos, which, as it turned out, was across the country and all of that. And it's getting down to the wire. They say they'll do it. Yeah, sure, we'll get the okay to turn on the lights and everything. But we run it down to the wire, to the night of filming. And finally, we're able to get hold of the electrician who can turn on the lights in these casinos. which are boarded up, closed. So the location manager, the electrician, me, a couple other people, we go in through the boards, we go up the stairs, and we go into sort of an attic area where the electrician is working on it and gets the lights turned on. So great, we're all happy, we get radio word, everything looks wonderful. We're heading down the stairs, and all of a sudden hear, freeze! And there are police officers with guns on us because some alert citizen had seen people going through the boards in the closed casino and called the police. And then they looked at us, and because they knew about the movie company, it's like, oh, it's you. And so they holstered their guns, which made me feel a whole lot better. But there were kind of odd things that would happen on Sister Act like that. We contributed locally to the story, was trying to figure out how Whoopi Goldberg's character was going to escape. She witnesses a murder in the change or the money counting room. How does she get out? And jokingly, I said, oh, well, you know, she could just push up the grate there and run down the street and catch Amtrak and go to San Francisco. Well, she doesn't catch Amtrak and go to San Francisco, but they actually worked in the grate scene. So she escapes through a grate in the movie, but they couldn't use a real grate. And in real life, you know, this is movie fantasy. If any of us wanted to escape through a grate that weighs 2 tons, no, it was all remade into foam rubber or something that she could lift up. But movies change, and that's some of what happens with film commissions and that sort of thing, is we contribute to the way the movie ends up looking. That was fun in Sister Act. The cast included Maggie Smith, who was just a treasure to be able to meet, Whoopi Goldberg, who's really quite amusing and as funny as you would expect, much funnier. Some of her lines were funnier that they had to cut out because they weren't Disney PG rated enough, but they were really, really funny. And one of the odd things in the movie, it had nuns who come to rescue Whoopi in the casino. So there were, I don't know how many nuns in the cast, say 7 or 8, and they had stand-ins, and all of them were wearing habits. And they're going through, this was Fitzgerald's casino, with habits and doing their shooting. Now, when there's filming going on in a casino, there'll be a sign saying, it's long and detailed, but it basically says, if you just happen to walk through our shot, you've just given permission to be here. We're filming. Most people, however, don't notice that. So the manager of Fitzgerald's was walking through with one of his business partner meeting guys he had to do something with, and they're walking on through, and this guy is walking next to him, looking around, seeing all these nuns in the casino. And in between takes, they weren't just sitting around. The woman who's the smallest, I forget her name as an actress, she actually was pulling one of those Big Bertha things. She was just sitting there working this machine. Kathy Najimy was sitting at the bar, you know, having a few drinks, and you'd see the nuns all over the casino doing various casino things. And so the director of Harold's Friend looks at him and says, the Catholic Church sure has changed since I was a kid.
That's good. That's a great story.
When you have a movie with a title like Waking Up in Reno, you hope it really does come to Reno. Now, movie magic means it doesn't necessarily follow through with that. But in this case, enough of Reno was written into the script that they really came here. It's a road picture. And it's supposed to be a bunch of or a couple of redneck friends coming to Reno for a big monster truck rally. I think that's what it is a monster truck rally. And so a lot of it takes place as they're heading into Reno. And the director thought it was kind of funny to shoot it in January, because who goes on vacation to a place like Reno in January to a monster truck rally? Well, he thought that was funny. But it was also good that we were able to do some of the road shots in this area, because one of Reno's advantage as a filming location was that it could step in for a lot of different places, especially in the mid-90s when Waking Up in Reno filmed. You could go a half hour and be up at Pyramid Lake, which was very, very isolated. You could go inland east for about a half hour and think you were in Midwest farmland. You could go west to the mountains. You could go south and see pretty agricultural land and old kinds of looking areas. They actually settled on Washoe Lake as one of the areas where they wanted to stage a car breakdown. That was a complicated thing for the Film Commission to detail because they had to close a road that a lot of people, that was their only way to get to work. So we had to really coordinate with that. And there were a few complaints about how can you stop, close my road and all that sort of thing. And then people found out, well, Patrick Swayze is in the movie. And it's like, well, can we go see Patrick Swayze? Then it's okay if you close the road. Ironically enough, that scene never did make it into the movie, but it got filmed. We were able to do road closures without preventing people from getting to work. As a matter of fact, people mostly got to work on time. My office did put out notice about that type of road closure just to give people that heads up. And that's another of the really glamorous things film commissions get to do is tell people about road closures and tell them, oh no, we're going to impact your life for a little bit, but hopefully there'll be some good result out of it. Economically, there is because people get hired. And then the fun of getting to see some of the famous people. As it turned out, Patrick Swayze was one of the most popular people we had up here. And the people on the movie company thought that was surprising because he was not at his zenith. He had done Ghost, he had done Dirty Dancing. He wasn't considered a big deal in Hollywood at that moment. But here, people wanted to just come see him. They had their copies of Ghost. They had their copies of Dirty Dancing. It turns out those movies have kept him a big star, even beyond. Obviously, now he's gone, but he is so well loved. And he was a super nice guy, too. That was the great thing. I brought my secretary on the set. Once she heard he was in town, it was kind of like, I have to have a set visit. I need a set visit. So we did that, and it was fun. He was really nice to her. She posed for a picture with him and got to check out his abs, and that made the day, and she treated me really well after that. Around 2008, about the time I was leaving the film office, the last movie I worked on was called Love Ranch, and it was a variation of Mustang Ranch. Not intended to be, this is the truth, this is exactly what happened. It's a springboard sort of issue about the first legal brothel in Nevada. And that did happen in the mid-'70s, that prostitution was legalized in counties that say it's okay. And that, again, is something that always puzzles visitors. You mean it's not legal in Reno? No, it's not legal in Reno. It's not legal in Las Vegas. There are specifics about how it is. In any case, the movie wasn't planning to film in Nevada. There were film incentives from New Mexico that gave $5 million in tax credits, plus $15 million in loans that didn't have to be paid back for a certain amount of time and all that kind of stuff. Nevada, in contrast, offered pretty much nothing, other than the wonderful personalities of the film office staff and the fact that we did have some good locations, but they could kind of fake those in New Mexico. It's just that Taylor Hackford, the director, loves to research. He wants his films to at least look authentic or, passable for what they're trying to be. So he decided that he should come to this area to see what it really looked like, how it's going to compare with New Mexico, and asked if I could arrange a set of tours of brothels. Well, sure, I was quite interested in doing that. Easy enough to make the list, but he wanted me to come along, which, again, I thought would be rather fascinating. But I also felt that perhaps we should not use a Nevada state vehicle with state license plate as we drove to the 7 different brothels that were in the area at the time. So I called to rent a discreet car and got there, and the rental agency gave me a Humvee. So very discreetly, we arrived at 7 different brothels in a Humvee, met with management, heard stories, learned about history. This was really part of just research for the film. But along the way, some interesting things happened in some of the brothels. As it turns out, Taylor and I still stay in touch all these years later, and he had the advantage of being able to get this really big star, Helen Mirren, to play the madam of the brothels, and he had an in because they've been together for 30 years, so she said yes, she'd do the film. And we still see each other every now and then, so one of my favorite bragging points is that I took Helen Mirren's husband to 7 different brothels, and she still speaks to me. So it's a good thing. But the movie did end up filming in Nevada. That's one of the advantages when you have people around to scout. I mean, of course I was going to show him some things that might excite his interest to film here. He was never going to bring the whole movie here, but by the time we were done, the producer told me they spent about $3 million in this area for just little bits of scenes that turn up in the movie. And those include the Reno Arch, which, yes, we all know that in 1976 there was a different arch from the one that's in the movie, but it looks old school enough to pass as a 1970s arch. In fact, it did show up in the late 70s. And we used Fitzgerald's Casino as a 70s style casino. It was not hard to dress it, make it look a little bit different to pass for a period casino. We used some mountain shots, even into California, up around Donner Lake, just because it's so spectacular looking. And they did some filming at the Wild Horse Saloon and Brothel, using the pool there for some of the ending of the movie. So Nevada ended up in the movie, even though it was never intended to be in a movie about Nevada. I'm hoping there's a good future of filmmaking in Reno. Some of the pluses that have happened is the flexibility of equipment. No longer do you need a crew of 120 people hauling all sorts of things around. And what that means also is that you need to have all these roads closed. You have to have all these services in huge numbers. Steven Soderbergh just put out a movie that he filmed entirely with a cell phone. Yes, of course, he had a bit of a crew, and he did have an Emmy-winning actress. That helps. A movie like Tangerine that made the circuit a couple years ago, very well received on the independent circuit, also done with a cell phone. So technology, when it gets that small, really, you don't need to have the impact on a community you used to have. The type of insurance that you'd need for a big film company, all the other costs associated with that, individuals can cut back on. I mean, today, you can take your own cell phone and make a better movie than many of what we used to call movies in the 1940s and 50s that you'd see on the list of movies made in Nevada. Pretty much any 20-year-old can do a better job with a cell phone now. So that offers a lot of open doors for making movies in the area. Now, if you're talking about the big budget, Steven Spielberg style massive productions, again, you're going to be looking at what's so unique about us that he can't do it anywhere else. And technology makes that one pretty difficult. What else do we offer to bring to the table for a big project like that? Why would they want to do it here? And that usually involves money and cost savings for the producers. On the other hand, we are getting an influx of people with Tesla and Amazon and some of the other businesses coming to the area. We're getting a lot more residents, a lot younger residents, and that may start having some impact on interest in making movies here. The more people who see it, the more energy the area it has for more than just one project. It does have a potential for a good future in this area. I think we're well suited to it, but it needs more marketing and more money attached to it.
Okay, Robin, we've really enjoyed hearing you tell us about the Reno movie history. And again, I want to thank you for joining us today. And it's great to see you again.
Oh, great to see you, and always fun to talk about movies.
Thank you.